everybody. Welcome to Read It Again, online book author series. Today I will be talking with Joel Shulkin about his new book, Adverse Effects. And when did it come out, Joel?
Today.
Yeah, so everybody run to the stores, run to Read It Again and come and get it, because it was a very, very good book. I loved the book. But before we talk about the book, let's talk about you a little bit. I know you graduated New York University School of Medicine.
Right.
You have a postgraduate degree from Harvard about public health, and your career is pediatric development medicine.
Right.
So before we get to writing, let's go flashback a little bit to where were you born, and a little bit about school and stuff. Is that when you got into writing? Did you know you wanted to be a doctor?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in New Hampshire. And so I decided to go to University of New Hampshire for undergrad. And while I was there, I did some nonfiction writing, like creative writing, both in high school and in college. And took a couple of courses, but I wasn't really looking at that as necessarily my career. Although my parents probably still have, when I was, I think, like 9 or maybe 8, I drew this picture for a contest where basically I said that when I grow up, what I wanted to be was an astronaut veterinarian who would take care of the animals in space and then write stories and draw pictures of them. So there was a little bit of that, definitely that arts interest, even way, way, way back. I always loved reading. Most of what I read when I was younger was sci-fi, actually, like sci-fi and fantasy, Piers Anthony and Isaac Asimov. But then when I was in college, I kind of knew that I wanted to be either a veterinarian or a doctor.
Okay.
Ended up actually kind of majoring in both, pre-med, pre-vet, and ultimately decided to go more towards medical, partly because if I decided to change my mind later, it's a lot easier to go from an MD to a DVM, whereas if you do a DVM first, then you have to start all over again for an MD. And then I decided that I got really interested in pediatrics, which actually worked out well, because comparing to working with animals, I figured, they're all really cute. They can't tell you what's wrong, so you have to play detective, and you have to deal with their parents. So end up working out in the long run. Yeah.
So you said you did some writing in high school and stuff like that too.
Yeah.
I'm always curious, were your parents artistic? Were they writers? Were they heavy readers?
They were readers. They both liked to read a lot. And in fact, I think the first copy of Medical Thriller I read was an old paperback, an old Michael Palmer or maybe Robin Cook paperback that my mom had kind of buried in their bookcase. So
and it stayed back in your memories and stuff like that, because that's what the book is about. We were before about a pretty cool event that took place in your college years.
Right.
I found the YouTube of you. You presented Bill Clinton, President Clinton,
right,
when he was signing one of his bills, right?
The motor voter bill, yes.
The motor How did that come about?
So it's funny because in high school, one thing that I really hated, I really loved all subjects, but the one that I really disliked was history. And when I took my senior year, U.S. history course, I even told the teacher, I'm not going to do well in this course because I just don't like history. And he said, well, just give it a chance. Let's see. And the difference was that instead of really talking about just dates and facts, he taught themes. And so we would study, why did the Civil War happen? And what if you were able to handle Lincoln? How would you handle the Reconstruction? What would you do? And I ended up loving it. And I got involved with a group that he was involved with, which is Youth in Government. And so we went up to the state capitol in New Hampshire for a few days, and we're all like legislators. So it was like a mock legislature. And again, I really enjoyed it. So that when I get into college, I end up running for and getting elected to the student senate. And one of the first role that they assigned me on my council was voter registration. And I thought, okay, well, that sounds pretty straightforward. And then I found out that in New Hampshire, you need to have you had to have a passport or a birth certificate to register to vote, which most college students don't carry around with them. And so there were all these barriers to young people voting. So I ended up getting the address for this group, Rock the Vote, off of the back of an REM CD, wrote them a letter, and figuring, nothing's going to come out of it. And then one day I get a call from the executive director saying how much they loved the letter. They wanted to do a massive New Hampshire campaign. I got put in charge, along with my friend Sarah Broadmeadow, in charge of the local, like the UNH area. They sent out Sarah Jessica Parker, Billy Baldwin, Jesse Jackson.
So then you already started your book writing ideas back then, and it was destined for you to do this. Right.
And so then when Clinton got elected, one of the things that he had promised during his campaign was that he would support Motor Voter. And so then again, the executive director called me at like midnight and woke me up and said, we want to send you to go represent us at the bill signing ceremony at the White House.
Yeah, so it was Vice President Gore introduced you, and then you read this great speech, so I could see where your writing skills started too. And then you presented President Clinton. What a pretty cool thing and stuff like that. Was that, like we talked before, that was kind of part of what started you writing? Did you continue to write speeches and write, or I know you did? I wrote my own little speeches when I was in, because I ended up getting involved in the American Medical Associations. Whenever I was running for position there, I had my own little speeches that I wrote for that. And I really didn't do much with writing for a while, because I was focused on medicine, kind of in politics and organized medicine. I did work on music for a while, so I actually play guitar and piano. So I was actually doing some songwriting for a while. And it wasn't until, and I was also in the military, so when I was stationed overseas, I was doing that. When I got out of the military and I had a year in between separating and going for my fellowship, I had these ideas for some stories and I started writing. Is that when you started the writing? Is that when you started writing you write poetry also? I
wrote some poetry at that time. I also had started writing like a fantasy thriller series. I can't even necessarily call them novels, because they're only about like 40 to 50,000 words each, which is really short for a novel. But there's some ideas that I got from that. And I even went and queried a couple of agents and got like just these flat out rejections, like no. So I started taking some courses and doing more reading on how to write a novel, how to be, how to query, how to really be professional about it. And there was a theme that kept coming up of, you need to write what you know.
Okay.
And at that point, I was doing my fellowship, and I thought, well, I'm a developmental behavioral pediatrician, which I work in a clinic. I see kids with developmental disorders, with autism, ADHD. That's not really much ground for a gripping thriller.
No.
And so what I actually did was I ended up writing an email to Tess Gerritsen and said to her, I don't work in the emergency room. I don't work I'm not a surgeon. I could create scenes like that, but it's not really going to be authentic, and it's not really me, and I like writing fantasy. I like writing other things. What should I do? And to my surprise, she actually wrote right back and said, in short, don't forget about write what you know, because if you only write what you know, how boring would that be? What you should do is write what you want to read. So if you want to read fantasy, write fantasy. If you want to write some other type of a medical novel that's not set in an ER or an OR, and she said, because gosh, I'm bored to tears by reading all these ER scenes, then do it.
Very cool.
And so then,
so is that when you started writing the book?
So then I was on a bus. At that point, I'd gotten married. My wife actually is from Brazil.
Okay, so that's why.
And so I was riding on the bus to work for my fellowship. And as I was sitting on the bus, it was a totally empty bus. The bus stops, a man gets on and goes and sits directly behind me. And I was like, what the heck? Familiar. Why would you do this? And then I started thinking, how creepy it is for me for that to happen, but how creepy it would be for a woman for that to happen. And I told my wife about it. And then she said, what if it was what if it turned out that there was something involved that this person knew something about him? And I said, yeah, imagine if he said, I know who you really are. And that just sparked the story.
Yep. That's definitely the story. How long did it take you to write it?
So the first draft, I think I wrote in about 8 months. And I was actually using this website called Fan Story where you could post things and get feedback. So I would post like a new chapter every day and also give my wife to read. And my wife is the type who wants to know the ending. So she would skip ahead and then she'd be like, but I haven't written the ending yet. She's like, why are you doing this to me? So it took about maybe a year to really write it. But then there were probably about 5 or 6 complete revisions between then. And it wasn't until 2 years ago that I finally, met my agent.
Okay. Well, it's definitely a great book. I really enjoyed reading it and stuff like that. So let's talk about the book. Adverse Effects.
Yes.
Your main character is Cristina Silva.
Cristina
Sorry.
Silva. Yes.
Silva. I'm messing up already. So she is a psychiatrist from Boston.
Yes.
She really enjoys her job. She's loves working with her patients. Everything is going smooth. Her and her patients volunteer in a drug study for the company Remind Pharmaceuticals.
Correct.
Right? And they're working on a drug called
Recognate.
And the drug is to help boost memories and
restore
memories that a person had a trauma or something like that. So everything is going well with these studies, and then all of a sudden you start your book right off the bat with Carl Franklin. And what happens with Carl Franklin? He
starts having psychotic symptoms. He's experiencing memories that aren't his, and he starts hearing a voice telling him that he's not who he thinks he is. And he's drinking alcohol to try to dull the hallucinations and to quiet the voice, but it doesn't work. He tries popping more pills to see if that'll fix it. That doesn't work. And so finally, as the voice keeps telling him, you have to accept who you are, you know who you are, he decides that he has another choice, and he goes and kills himself.
Yeah. And he jumps out the window. And that was like how your book starts. I was like, oh, this is going to be a good book. And why he's jumping, though, like his neighbors hear him screaming about Quinn, and everything else like that and stuff like that. So that brings in, though, one of my favorite characters was Detective Gary Wilson, because he's investigating to make sure that this was a suicide and nothing else like that.
Right.
So you also have a detective in the book also, as well as the suspense. So there's a little detective work in here too. And then we also have the one of her other patients has a same kind of psychotic break too, and has an issue that gets investigated too. But then Christina's life changes even more when Sebastian shows up on the bus.
Right.
And says exactly that. You're not Cristina. Don't believe what they're telling you. That kind of stuff, and that really gets everything started. So you and I discussed that you would read a little bit of your book, which kind of summarized what you and I were talking just about Cristina and the memory. And that was, if you would do that now, that would be great.
Absolutely. Let me get my copy.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And let me just explain. So Grisabella is Christina's cat, just to give you a heads up. Which an astute reader might pick up. Grisabella is the name of the cat in the opera Cat, or the musical Cats, who sings Memory.
Oh, I didn't pick that up.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So I've got a lot of little Easter eggs in the book that you can kind of look for.
I didn't pick that one up. I picked some of your other stuff up. I didn't pick that one.
All right. Cristina nuzzled Grisabella's back, drinking in her earthy smell before opening the folder and emptying its contents onto her coffee table. A stack of newspaper articles printed from the internet stared back at her. Her heart beat faster as she recognized the headline on the first. Local couple dies in hit and run. She'd already read that piece and wasn't about to read it again. Setting it aside, Cristina studied the second article. A middle-aged banker in Spokane, missing for 3 days, had been found dead in his apartment, his hand gripping the knife he'd used to stab his own eye. Cristina fought the urge to vomit. She tossed the article aside. Her stomach knotted as she flipped through 4 more articles. All of them described violent suicides in cities across the country. But for the article on her parents, none of the others had anything to do with her. Had Sebastian dos Santos killed those people? And could he have been the hit-and-run driver responsible for her parents' deaths? The last article was dated 5 years ago and from O Globo, a paper out of Rio de Janeiro. In Portuguese, the headline announced a project to study a new treatment for mental health factors causing gang violence in the Rio slums called favelas. Alongside the article was a black and white photo of a research team standing next to a Brazilian flag. Cristina shook her head. What could her parents' death, a handful of suicides, and a Brazilian research team possibly have in common? She sifted through the articles, then checked in vain to see if there was anything else inside the envelope. Chewing her lip, Cristina nudged Grisabella off her lap and opened her MacBook. After it powered up, she typed the name Sebastian dos Santos into the search engine. Several Facebook profiles popped up with that name, but none of their pictures resembled the man in the fisherman's cap. There was a long-dead French explorer with the same name.
Yeah, so Sebastian was the man that came on the bus, which is pretty much very much in the very beginning of the book. So you start with the theme and the plot pretty much in the beginning of the book.
Right.
That must have been like difficult to because now you got to run with it the whole time. Was that hard to do?
No, I mean, even in my early drafts, I kind of had that going already. I knew what I wanted to have, starting out, especially that confrontation with her and Santos. What did change a few times, at one point, I actually had started out with Franklin in the original draft. And then when I was having trouble finding an agent, I actually wrote a new prologue, which was more like showing her waking up in the hospital and showing Santos kind of watching from the background. And then I decided that didn't really fit so well either. And I took that out, kept it as kind of a deleted scene. And I went back to Carl, and I think that just cut the reader more, faster, and also left more question when the other characters who were in that prologue appeared.
Yeah. And we were talking about her parents. We find out her parents were killed in a car accident, and she suffered from amnesia and memory block. So she also takes the drug to try to remember what happened and everything else like that. But that kind of stirs her in a whole different direction and stuff like that. So and
that's really where the medical thriller element comes from, is that drug plays such a key role in why isn't it working right? Why are people dying? What's happening? And also the fact that here she's taking it herself and she's worried that she might suffer
the adverse
effects from it. But at the same time, if she stops taking it, what's going to happen to all her memories?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought that was very interesting too, because memories was also a theme that was throughout the book, but we'll talk about that. What we did forget to mention too is in the very beginning is Santos also advises her that she's part of an organization called Zero Dark.
Right.
And stuff like that, which again, she has totally no memory of anything past the car accident and her new life as she is now. So she goes on the adventure to try to find out what's real and what's not and who she really is. And that leads on the adventure to Washington, D.C. and to Brazil. Now I know why you have Brazil in the book.
Right. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And stuff. We talked about Detective Wilson. Why did he come in? What he brings, I guess, a little bit of sense of humor to the book.
It brings a little humor. He also
works with the ears, and so that's when you know to really pay attention. When his ears start to burn, pay attention, and then I like how he has the whack-a-mole. So when you think you're getting somewhere, you whack it, and you did. You changed the direction.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I wanted him to be someone who could gather information that Cristina wouldn't be able to gather herself. And also to serve as sort of a foil to Cristina as well, because there's some points where it seems like he's helping her, and other times he's kind of working against her. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to have that kind of interplay between them.
Yeah, and then through him, you brought in the two FBI agents,
right?
Which those were characters in itself, and it was neat how you brought them in. But Wilson had already had some history with one of them and stuff like that. So when you brought your characters in, they already blended in with the story, and I thought that was so cool. You didn't just throw characters in just to throw in a character.
Right. Well, since I got the book accepted by Blackstone, I started listening to a podcast called The Writer's Detective with the detective Adam Richardson, and so he answers questions and gives feedback on writing, which really helped me a lot in writing the detective characters. So for the sequel, that helped a lot. But one thing that he actually talked about was that there's this trope of the FBI, the federal agencies versus the local police departments, and that really in most cases that's not how it is. They usually are very cooperative. But for the purpose of the story, I wanted to have that conflict. And so having Wilson and one of the agents having that background,
it was Forrester, right? Forrester.
Yes. Yeah. It gave them a reason why there was that animosity. And it wasn't really between the FBI and the agents in the department. It was just between these two individuals.
And there was a very good reason too why. But, we can't really talk too much about it because it would be giving a lot of stuff away. And I don't want to give anything away.
Right.
So you have to pay attention to their relationship and see where it leads, because it was very surprising. I did not expect how the ending of that all and stuff like that. And then another one of the characters that I liked in there too was Quinn. He's like underlined of all the people. He's important, but you keep him quiet a little bit.
Right. Well, and I wanted him to kind of be that sinister force behind everything. And that also helps because then it doesn't give away his identity either.
Right. He was a mysterious businessman who was working on some kind of plot, and Christine, they were nervous, and Christine was related too because they were nervous about her memory coming back and everything else. So
right. And I think, if I was asked to come up with a comp, like a comparison books, it's hard for me to come with comparison books, but what I would say is this book is Total Recall meets Born Identity meets Alias. Okay? Because we've got that whole memory part, and of course it's a little gender flipped version of that. But especially, with Total Recall with, the character all these things going on and not really knowing even who they really were in the past. And then with Alias, just all these dual identities. And so I think, it's important to recognize that it is a medical thriller, but there is also part spy thriller. And so there are going to be dual identities. There's going to be a lot of twists and turns.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot just besides medical. There was detectiving, and then there was this mysterious character and everything else like that. But you blended them in so well. So how did you keep track of the characters as you were going along? Like, did you write one character all the way through and then added the other ones, or?
No, I mean, when I first wrote it, I wrote chapter by chapter. So I just, actually pantsed it. I just kind of wrote down, okay, this is what I'm going to do and how I want to write. And it was after I got a finished draft, then I went back and wrote everything down, like outlined it to see, okay, what do I have here? Which character's which? And then try to figure out how things would work.
Yeah. Did you get a little confused though with the also known as? Because some of the characters have also known as, so you had to really keep, a sharp eye on that too when you were writing it too, right?
Right. Yeah. I was able to keep that fairly straightforward, but I did also make a lot of notes myself, wrote things down to just in case.
Yeah, and I guess that also adds to the mysterious of the book. The spy aspects of the book was
right,
because some of them had, went by other names and had occupations and stuff like that.
Right.
But reading the book too, I was fascinated about the memory part. I thought you brought out some really great points about memory. Is it really good to remember your past, especially if it was a trauma? How will that affect you?
Right.
So where did that idea come, the memory aspects of it?
Well, once I had that idea of the of a man on the bus saying, I know who you really are, then it just naturally led into the idea of that this must involve memory, that she doesn't know who she is. And that just kind of led down that road. And knowing that I wanted to write as a medical thriller, I really said, well, what if she was taking some experimental memory drug? And I actually did research on, what studies were out there, what was being studied in being involved in memory. And again, there's even newer ones now that are out there. But, the idea that, and there are supplements, there are some little drugs that are being tested for various aspects of memory. There really isn't anything that's a true, we're going to restore all your memories.
Right.
But that could appear at some point. And so then I started thinking about, well, but would that be necessarily good for everybody? Yeah,
that was, and I think one of was like, that really hit, like, wow, how is it going to affect you? How right. What would change? And in getting some of their memory too, they had a hard time figuring out what was reality, what was their memories, and everything else like that. So I thought that whole idea of the twisting and everything else was pretty good. And that was one of my things. So obviously then you did do some research about the medical parts of it, the drugs and that. And the other thing too is that when I started writing this, I was in the public health program at Harvard. And one of the courses I was taking was on international human rights. And so I also started thinking about, well, one of the aspects of drug testing is it always being done ethically? And especially when it's being done overseas, where you don't really have that IRB oversight, where things aren't as closely controlled. And in fact, that's been a bone of contention internationally for quite some time. So that led to the idea of, well, what if we don't just limit this story to the United States? Which we find out that the drug is being tested in other countries and stuff. And that now, it's always nice to hear where the idea comes to, because now it's like, oh, now I understand that, you appreciate the book a little bit better when you hear the background of why that's there and everything else like that. But I really did enjoy it. Are you working on anything else now? And so Blackstone has already greenlit the sequel. Oh, so it is going to be a sequel.
Yeah, and it's not a secret because I do have a blurb about it on my website. So the sequel is called Toxic Effects.
Okay.
And so my editor is going to start working with me on it next month. And then I also have.
Oh, sorry. Are these characters coming into that book too, or?
So the two main characters will be there, and then there'll also be two new villains.
Oh. Okay.
And without giving anything away, I'm kind of sticking to a similar theme that we have our two, main hero and heroine. But then there's one who's clearly a villain, and then there's another character who is more another POV character who is kind of in that gray area that you don't really know for sure whose side they're on.
Yeah, you really, some of you could tell in this book, you could tell were the villains, and then there were some that you weren't sure, and then one that I did not see coming at all. So I look forward to, you're going to keep that kind of same theme then in the second one too.
Yes. And then I've got another novel that I'm having my beta readers look at right now. That is, I'm billing, it's more cross genre, so I'm billing it more as a medical / sci-fi / military thriller.
Interesting.
Yeah, and this one has to do more with an unsanctioned military experiment on soldiers, trying to. A simple way to put it is Captain America gone wrong.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah,
I look forward to that one. Are you still writing short stories also and poetry too? Or did you?
I haven't done much with either of those lately. Short stories every so often. I had pulled out a couple of short stories and tried working on that and submitted them, but I really didn't have much time on that. I do have a couple of children's picture books that I had written a while ago, and now that I've got twins who just turned 6, I've gone back to editing them and getting feedback. And then hopefully I'm going to send them to my agent to see if we can find a publisher and illustrator for them. Because I would love to have my girls be able to read them, while they're still young enough to enjoy them.
Yeah. And you're still working full time.
And I am still working full time. Yep. So, fortunately in developmental pediatrics, I don't take call. I'm not working weekends or nights. So it's pretty much an 8 to 5 job. And so I wake up at 5 a.m. every morning. And after I make breakfast and everything, I write for an hour, and so I try to get at least 500 words in each day. Sometimes I'm lucky and I get more than that. And then if I have, breaks over lunch, if I'm caught up on my work or I've got a lot of cancellations or no-shows, then I might have a little more time to write as well.
Is it hard to write though, broken up like that, or
It is a little bit sometimes. It used to be hard for me to get back into it. I've gotten better at it. Like if I'm writing something new, I try to leave on a cliffhanger. Like I never end writing on a chapter, even though I write my books in a way that the chapter ends with a page turner so that you want to see what happens.
Yeah.
But I don't do that with when I'm writing it, because then I forget where I was trying to go. Okay. So what I do is I always finish the chapter and then at least write the first couple of sentences of the next chapter so I know where to pick up.
Oh, okay. And I take it, do you write over weekends too, or do you just try to do it over the...
Yeah, still the same thing, that 5 a.m. writing, but then the rest of the day, unless if I'm on a deadline, like when I was writing the sequel, then my wife might give me a couple hours on the weekend to write, and she'll take care of the kids. But for the most part, I write during the morning before everybody's awake, and then the rest of the day I'm spending with my family. Wow,
so you found a good balance of writing and to keep your everyday life going too.
Right.
Because I often wondered, once you start writing books, are you always now just doing writing, and do you forget about the rest of things?
Right.
Life and stuff. But,
no, I had to learn that back in residency, how to find that balance. So
that's true. So that did help you and stuff like that. Right. So I was just going to say, next book. Getting so it's like really hard to talk about your book because you can't really give away secrets.
I know.
Was there one particular character that you really enjoyed writing in the book?
There's a couple. I really enjoyed Santos. Just, he's got kind of a dry humor.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of points there where I don't even want to give it away, but there's a couple points where you're just like, okay, that's funny. And my agent just had like these little LOLs written after you make a comment. I also enjoyed writing Devi, even though she's not. And so Devi is Christina's receptionist or office manager, actually. And she's not a huge part of the story, but she just is very like happy, full of life, and very chipper. And I think it's also a nice balance for some of the darker elements of the story.
Yeah, they did add a good sense of humor, but also too, Devin's there for another reason too.
Yeah. And the same thing I think also can be said for Lucas, who is the medical examiner. He originally was a pasty, like a very stock character, pasty kind of, what you often think of as an examiner.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up changing it. I said, I want to make this less predictable. And so totally flipped it around, made him look nothing like what you'd expect, act nothing like what you expect from medical examiners, because most medical examiners are not that stereotype.
Right.
And so having him, again, even though he's a medical examiner, he's very boisterous, very, very happy and cheerful. And I liked having that kind of balance in there as well.
Yeah. So that was that. Now, which characters are going to be moving on to your new book, to the next book?
I don't know if I want to give too much of that away, because then it kind of implies who lives and who dies. But
well, we could say the main characters.
The main character, the main two characters definitely continue in the next one, and there are some even twists on their interactions as well. Yeah,
because we really can't tell the thing of this book. It's like it's a hard book to discuss, and it was hard because I was reading it by myself, and I couldn't say to somebody, "Oh, what about this? Did you catch that?" Like this would be a great book club book, because there's a lot of good topics, and you could run to your, I can see a book, club discussing this. Did you see that? Did you see this? And did you see that?
Right.
What books do you like to read? And we were talking too in your book too. You mentioned Michael Palmer. How'd that come about too?
Well, I mean, I had actually read one or two of his books, and then while I was back in New Hampshire after the military, and as I was starting to work on writing again, I went to a meeting of the Medical Society of Massachusetts, and the International Medical Graduate group of that society actually had invited Michael Palmer to come talk to them. Mm-hmm. And so I had time. I just made time. I was like, I'm going to go and beat him and listen. And so it was great listening to him because he talked about how when he first wrote he wrote his first book and he submitted to an agent, it was about this surgeon who in the middle of operation finds a key inside a patient's stomach, and the key leads to all this adventure. And the agent said to him, I mean, it's a nice story, but it's not a medical thriller. There's nothing medical. Yeah, he's a doctor, but there's nothing there. And that helped me a lot to think about in writing these books. Okay, I got to make sure if I'm going to call it a medical thriller that it's not just a doctor, but there's a medical piece to this. And so I ended up reading, I love reading his books. I still read him and by his son, Daniel, who's become a good friend of mine as well. And of course, Tess Gerritsen, her book Harvest is one of my absolute favorites. I don't know if you ever read that one. It's one of the first one, I think. And it's about a plot to harvest organs from international adoptees, which actually, is one of the areas in developmental medicine I work with is actually international adoption. that one really, struck home with me. Another great book that I just read recently that I'm sure most of people watching will be familiar with is The Silent Patient.
Mm-hmm.
And that one is just a fantastic book.
So it sounds like you also read a lot within your genre.
I do, yeah.
Do you find that hard when you're writing a book in that same genre? Do you?
Well, sometimes. I mean, it does become tricky because I don't want to duplicate what's already been done. And sometimes I think, oh, I have a good idea. Oh, wait, did I read that in one of Michael's books or Daniel's books or Tessa's books? Mm-hmm. But I also still enjoy, I just finished reading Gravity by Tess Gerritsen as well. And that one's totally different because it's out in space. Mm-hmm. And so I was really paying more attention to, and it's almost more of a horror story, I think, even than a medical thriller. So it was a nice twist to be able to read that. A lot of the thrillers I read are not just medical thrillers. I've read, I really enjoyed Jennifer Hillier's books, as well as, Hannah Mary McKinnon. So there's been a lot more of those domestic thrillers that I've been reading lately as well. And then every so often I'll pull out something that's outside my genre. I might go back and read, a sci-fi book or another fantasy.
What's your favorite sci-fi? We have a very big sci-fi book club here. So.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. So, again, I don't think I mentioned earlier, but when I was growing up, I just read almost everything by Isaac Asimov, and he was my go-to author, especially the Robot series. Far as new books, I'm trying to think of which one I read lately.
Are you going to try to write in the sci-fi genre, or are you going to just?
Yeah, I have a short story that I wrote that was actually about a virtual reality world, kind of like The Matrix, but not really. But I gotten some feedback that maybe this isn't your genre, not the right one to write in. But the fantasy I may go back to at some point. I still have that fantasy thriller series that I had written way back in the beginning, and mm-hmm. I had started to rewrite it using all the knowledge that I have now. But again, put that aside. And I also have a young adult fantasy novel that I have written set in Haiti that I may come back to at some point just because I really enjoy the story. It's based off of a legend of the Siren and the Whale. I'm hesitant a little bit just because of all the controversy over authors writing outside of their voice. Because I don't want to make it seem like I'm appropriating that culture, misrepresenting myself. But at the same time, I'm not really trying to write it as, oh, this is what it's like to be Haitian or to be a person of color. It's more about this is just happened to be a fantasy story that is set in Haiti.
Set in Haiti.
Yeah. So I may come back to it, or I may if I can find a Haitian author who would like to co-write it with me, then I might be able to do it that way.
That would be an interesting idea to do it too.
Yeah.
Do you think you'll go back to just writing full time? Are you ever going to keep your day job?
For now I am. And part of that's because I'm the only practicing developmental behavioral pediatrician in the Tampa Bay area. So
yeah, I noticed. You look up and your name is pretty much there and stuff like that.
So that keeps me busy. If I really, if I have enough books under my belt, then it would be nice to at least back down to part-time so that I can really dedicate more time to writing. Also, it would be nice to have more time to spend with my family, Mm-hmm. But I also enjoy what I do.
Do you find it's getting easier now that you got this book under your belt? Is it more pressure now for the second book, or do you find it's a little bit easier because you learned from this book?
It was definitely pressure in writing this the second book, just because there was that whole idea of I got to make it as fresh as the first one, and I got to try to make it so that there's still that same energy, that same twist. So it was really hard, and also had to keep going back and looking at the first book to say, wait, is this consistent with what I had before? So that has been tough. Now that I've got that one done, it was a little bit easier writing the other book, the military one that I mentioned, because that one was totally different. So there was less, and I also didn't have a deadline, so it was less pressure on when I had to get it done. But now, as I'm looking at, I've got a few other ideas that I'm starting to sketch out for some other books that are related, and that is getting a little more tricky. Okay, now how am I going to make this work?
So now you got the edge. You got it. You got a good book under, and now that gives you the drive to continue on and stuff like that.
And it's funny too, because I said, okay, once I finish writing the second book and get it turned in, now I'm going to take a break. I'm just going to rest a little bit. No, couldn't do it. I'm still waking up at 5 a.m. and still working.
Well, I always find it amazing because that authors can have so many ideas in their heads and come up with so many things. Like, I don't have, unfortunately, that creativity to come up with that kind of stuff. And it just amazes me that you can go right from one book right to another and everything else like that. Yeah. Do you think this is going to be more than 2 books? Do you think the second book might be the last one, or is it too hard to say?
No. I mean, I pretty much made it clear with the second book that there should be a third book. So.
Wow. So the suspense is going to continue on. Oh, I can't wait till these books come out. Yeah, but next time I'm going to read it in a book club. I don't want to read it by myself and not have anybody to discuss it with. And so I look forward to our readers that come to read it again and buy the book and come back and discuss the book with me. And
there you go.
Like but any advice for starters? Anybody that's starting to write? Anything one good advice that you picked up?
I mean, definitely read, in the genre that you want to write, so that you kind of have an idea of how it's, what that book should look like, how to write, and not just read the books, but read about writing. Because again, even though I took some creative writing courses in college, when it came down to actually writing a novel, it's not the same thing. And then none of that prepares you for writing a query letter, writing a synopsis, trying to get the attention of an agent, or if you decide that you're going to self-publish, how to manage that business aspect. The main reason for me why I did go the traditional route rather than self-publishing is because knowing my time, I just don't have that time and financial investment to go put into doing all the marketing myself, doing all the production myself. And so I've been very blessed that Blackstone has been so supportive and done such a fantastic job in really promoting this.
Yeah. Now, Blackstone came in. Was that I did some research in that you won an award for some of your short stories and stuff like that. Is that how Blackstone found you, or did you find them, or? No.
So I had actually queried my agent, Lynette Novak from the Seymour Agency. I had seen her pop up a few times on these pitch fests, like Twitter pitch fests. And when I read her profile, I said, wow, she's has just the right, she's looking for this book, basically. And I originally sent her a query with that other prologue that I'd written, and I didn't hear anything back for a couple of weeks. And on my own, I said, well, I'm going to redo this. And I redid my query letter, put the old prologue back in, cleaned it up, and I queried her again. And it was almost immediately after, she said, I'm glad that, and I even explained, I said, I know I queried you already, but I wanted to let you know that I had made some changes and I really would like you to look at it. And she wrote back almost immediately and said, I'm glad that you made those changes. I want to see the rest of the book.
Wow.
So she's the one that once I signed on with her, she sent out the submissions package. And that's how we got Blackstone involved.
Okay. And then, so your next book is with them also and stuff.
Correct.
And everything else.
Yeah, it was a 2-book deal.
Was that what it was?
Yes.
Well, I think we're almost towards the end. I thank you so much. Everybody, definitely go grab the book. I look forward to talking to you about it because there's so many good twists and turns in it. And I really, really enjoyed it. So thank you so much for sharing your talent and talking with us.
Well, thank you for having me and having this.
Wait to read your next one. When is it coming out?
We don't have a publication date yet, but it will be next
year. Get through this one that just came out this today, right? So come by and get it and support your other local independent bookstores if you're not in our area.
Right.
And thank you so much for your time. It was such a nice getting to know you better. And now I get to see some of you in the book now that I've talked to you. So now I got a good understanding of some things and your characters and stuff, because you're definitely in some of them.
All right. Thank you.
So thank you.
All right.
Phew.